The sexual abuse and rape of black male slaves by white women who owned them remains a secret. White racists didn't want everyone to know how white women used their black male slaves as lustful playthings and took them home as slaves. They only wanted reports of sexual abuse of black women to come to light. In secret, staying away from their men would definitely make people wonder. If most people know this, it will hurt white supremacists' pride, make their wives question their loyalty, and finally make them look bad. But white women who owned slaves did more than just sexually abuse black male slaves. Watch this movie to learn more about how they did it. Now let's begin. In slavery, white women in the farmer class had a lot of power, even though society expects women to be feminine. As slave leaders, these women, particularly the black male slaves, played a crucial role in sustaining and ensuring the longevity of society. Remember that white women in the American South before the Civil War couldn't vote or run for office? Their husbands legally owned the property they held before marriage. However, they shared an important commonality with white men. They were able to buy, sell, and own slaves. In her book, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South, historian Stephanie Jones Rogers says that white women were not just silent bystanders when it came to slavery, which is different from what other historians have said. On the contrary, they participated and increased their economic strength by owning black slaves. For her study, Jones Rogers used a different source. The Federal Writers Project, part of the Works Progress Administration, allowed her to interview former slaves during the Great Depression. These discussions reveal that numerous white girls received training to become slave owners and masters from an early age. Parents and other family members who owned slaves would give these young girls black slaves as gifts at Christmas and when they turned 16 or 21. Some accounts even claim that white girls received slaves as their own property when they were infants. There is one case in court documents that stands out. A woman talks about how her grandfather gave her a black slave when she was only 9 months old. How could a child, unaware of her slave, know that she had one? She clearly learned that she was in charge of another person and that they were her property. Because they were taught these things from a young age, these kids never saw black slaves as real people. This kind of parenting played a big role in shaping deeply racist and supremacist attitudes in society. Wealthy white women subjected black male slaves to sexual mistreatment, one of the worst forms of abuse. White women often portray themselves as quiet and innocent, yet at times, they exploited their power and control over black male slaves to engage in sexual relationships and commit rape without their consent. These acts kept a cycle of sexual abuse and humiliation going. Harriet Jacobs' book, In the Life of a Slave Girl, is one example of this. Jacobs, who was a slave herself, wrote about how planters' daughters would take advantage of male slaves, making them seem even less human. It's possible that the white girls' fathers and other male relatives were unaware that enslaving them to black men would equalize their treatment of people. That is to say, just as white men sexually exploited and raped black women, wealthy white women also were empowered to rape and abuse black male slaves. Even though both types of sexual abuse were cruel, wrong, and scary, white men were proud to rape black women. They couldn't be proud, though, because they knew that their white wives, daughters, and sisters were having physical relationships with black male slaves. It's important to mention something here. The sexual relationships between black male slaves and white upper-class women did not necessarily indicate mutual consent. Black men who were slaves had to follow orders. If they didn't comply, they faced severe beatings and occasionally even death. Therefore, it appeared that enduring sexual abuse was preferable to facing death. In her book, Harriet Jacobs wrote about a master whose reputation suffered when his daughter chose one of the most abused male slaves on his farm to father her first grandchild. It's important to mention something here. The daughter didn't pick a white guy or one of her father's smarter servants. Instead, she selected the most abused black male slave, allowing her to wield her power over him without fear of detection. The behavior described here is clearly sexually predatory, so it's difficult to call the connection consensual. This is a form of sexual abuse, in fact. Plantation mistresses and other upper-class women, like their male peers, were able to sexually abuse and control their black slaves, if not rape them. Planter-class white women also used threats to accuse slaves of rape or attempted rape if they refused to have sexual relationships as a way to control their sexuality. White men hold a deeply rooted belief that women are vulnerable and require protection, leading to their control and dominance. This strategy played on that belief. This gave them the power to control black male slaves based on their race. Sexual exploitation likely occurred for a variety of reasons. These women may have done these things out of boredom, sexual frustration, or to compensate for their lack of power in other areas of their lives. Husbands primarily owned planter-class white women, limiting their personal freedom. Exploiting slaves may have made them feel more powerful and in charge. Please help us make more movies for you by subscribing to our channel and liking the video. This neighborhood needs your help to become stronger. Let's move on now. This study doesn't say that white women who abused black slave men wouldn't have done it if women were more respected, or that it would have stopped if women were more reputable. But white women who owned slaves often let out their anger on the slaves by being mean and violent, and they probably used sex as another way to dominate and control a society where they didn't have much power. Because of their restrictions, these women's lives were severely limited. They couldn't go on trips without a male companion, and in the time before the Civil War, it was common for men to abuse their wives as a way to keep them in line. Many women who worked on plantations didn't like how limited their freedom was, and how they had to be good wives and happy while their husbands slept with or raped black women slaves. In some ways, this made them feel even more alone and helpless, like they were prisoners in a society that praised how wonderful their culture was, but often left them feeling lonely and down. However, they also endured various forms of abuse. During their enslavement, African Americans endured numerous horrific physical abuses. This harsh oppression happened in a wide range of places, from small farms to huge plantations, from cities to rural fields, and even in the transportation and industry sectors. People of color and white people lived together in this grim environment, and their relationships took many forms. Surprisingly, white male slave owners were not the only ones to inflict physical abuse. There were also cruel acts by white women that involved black male slaves. Physical and mental scars from these acts, which included whipping, beatings, and other forms of physical punishment, will never go away. Madame Marie Delphine Lalaurie was involved in a shocking case that shows how severe physical abuse could get. She cruelly tortured her black male slaves, inflicting horrible injuries such as gouging out their eyes and punching holes in their heads, and then allowing larvae to live in those horrific wounds. If you think this story isn't telling the truth, get ready for even more shocking information about this slave owner from the 18th century. Madame Lalaurie lived in a house at 1140 Royal Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana. A fire erupted there on April 10, 1834. Neighbors quickly offered to extinguish the fire and help the family leave, but they saw right away that something was wrong. In the 19th century, the Southern elite would never have seen the lady of the house trying to protect her valuables without the help of her slaves. When people asked her where her slaves were, she told them to mind their own business. Some people thought she was strange, and others said they could hear weak moans and screams coming from the attic, which made individuals more suspicious. To learn more, a group broke into the house. Opening the attic door revealed something so terrifying that words cannot describe it. Some people were sick enough to throw up just from the smell. They were lucky enough to find Madame Marie Delphine Lalaurie's torture room. She had a room full of unimaginable horrors. It contained piles of slave corpses. The discovery of this chamber of horrors unequivocally confirmed the heartbreaking truth about Lalaurie's slaves' disappearance. She liked being cruel, so she used to torture her black slaves, who were mostly black men, by ripping off their skin and taking out their innards. Did you know that powerful white women who owned slaves had sexual relationships with black male slaves? What do you think? Why doesn't the United States want you to learn about this negative aspect of black history? How do you feel about this? Tell us in the area below. Would you like more videos? If so, please help us out by clicking the bell icon and subscribing to the Black History Legacy. You can also watch more videos on our channel.